Welcome to ReSounding, a podcast exploring the power of the arts in advocacy and in action. We talk with artists and activists, taking a deep dive into questions surrounding the causes of displacement, the strength and the vulnerability of people on the move, and the potential of the arts to shine a light on social injustice and impact people's lives for the better. This month I spoke with Eduard Nazarski, the former head of Amnesty International Netherlands, about activism, the role of the arts, and the refugee advocacy initiative Alarm Europa. Eduard, good morning and welcome to this first episode of the ReSounding podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning to you too. Yeah.
How are you today?
More or less fine, at least, physically fine. We had elections yesterday, and I still have to think a bit about that, what the election results mean.
Okay, maybe we'll come to that as we talk.
Yeah.
Our aim with this podcast is to explore the arts in advocacy. So I want to give us some focus on the music in your initiative. But perhaps first you can just give us an introduction to Alarm Europa so we understand the initiative.
Yeah. Well, a couple of people, I wasn't one of the first, but started Alarm Europe. I joined after 1 month or 6 weeks, I think. But I started Alarm Europe because they were increasingly worried on what happens at the borders of Europe, in the Moria camp, but also in the Balkan and refugee camps across the border of Europe, where people are in often desperate situations and where governments are reluctant, to make any solutions work for those people. So Alarm Europe started then in saying we want a call to the mayors of towns and villages in the Netherlands, a call to step up and to speak out and to say we in this town can accommodate refugees, and please government, step up your efforts and come in action, do something. So we started that, and it grew a bit as an initiative, as a network. And then after some time, we found out, more or less by coincidence, that it would be very nice to have also a tune that really connects the advocacy call and the verbal call to what we wanted to do. So that is what we then did, and we looked for it. And one of the central persons in Alarm Europa, Anthony Heidweiler, who is connected to the Dutch National Opera, he came up with the song of Pablo Casals, in English, The Song of the Birds. He sang that in a wonderful way, and then afterwards we thought, well, it would also be nice to have that song played, performed by other musicians. So we called musicians, would you like to join? And I think we have now around 40 or 50 that already did so. And that is really a very big success, I think.
Yeah, and it's absolutely beautiful. I didn't know the piece of music.
Well, but this Anthony Heidweiler, he came up with that because he had been in Spain, and he knew that Pablo Casals, who made this song famous, always played it when he was exiled from Spain because of the Franco regime, the fascist regime. And Casals made this a song against fascism and a song for freedom. So when he played it at every concert, when he performed, he started playing this song on his cello. So it has this connection of freedom and anti-fascism. Well, and that made it special for us.
Yes. And there's one version on your website with the guy playing the accordion.
Yes.
Which is stunning. It becomes a kind of, it's a whole other atmosphere.
Yeah, but that's so interesting. Wilco is that. And I heard him perform in a theater when it was still possible here to go to theaters. And later on, I met him at Alarm Europe. He joined us just to see what we did. And I told him that, playing the accordion and being, not loud and not busy, but really very quiet, that makes you think. That makes you think on what he means, what the melody means, and if you connect that to our message, please get up, stand up, in order to campaign for refugee rights and do something for other people, in fact, just like us, that are in really very, very difficult and dear situations. And we created those situations, so we can also change them in the camps in Europe.
Yeah.
But if you had then such an accordion playing, that is, at least it works for me and it works for more people. You can see that.
And there's the video, I think probably from maybe the start of Alarm Europa, which is you playing saxophone, and I think Anthony talking, and you're stood at, I think you're in The Hague.
No, I think in Utrecht.
Utrecht.
Yeah, that's where I live, and Anthony too. I think Sander is speaking there.
Okay.
The three of us did, we didn't have this song front.
There's something very striking about just seeing, on camera I could see two of you standing with this piece of music in front of this huge imposing building, trying to have an impact. It is the kind of feeling when I watch that video. It's here we are and we have this one piece of music, we're going to play this, we're going to talk, we're going to film it. It's not a camera crew, I don't think. I think it's a guy with a phone or with a small camera, and we're going to try and change something in that building there. And there's flags flying, there's all the intimidation of ceremony. There's a European flag, there's a Dutch flag, it's kind of imposing it. You see the institution there behind you.
Yeah, it is a city hall, and we do it every first Monday of the month after we have the alarm siren, which I don't know how it is in England, but in the Netherlands they are still tested every first Monday of the month.
I live in the Netherlands now, and I can't tell you how scared I was the first time I heard those alarms. Nobody warned me. There's going to be alarms everywhere in the whole country. I thought, what on earth? But you're making the music after that. So you have this alarm which is designed in case there is an emergency for people, and then you're playing this song, the Song of the Birds, to say actually there is an emergency. And this is another alarm. There is an emergency going on today. It's not a test. This is not a test, people. This is real.
No, and as you say, you have this alarm sounding, the siren, which is very, very alarming and very loud. You have this huge building, and then you try just to have 1 minute or so, a very thoughtful or very emotional little piece of music, and then hoping that people that hear that think, we should also be more attentive to the needs of refugees.
Do you have a favorite recording of that piece of music?
I did like very much the accordion player, but also the oboe with a lute, I think, from the Dutch wind orchestra, Bart Schneeman, the Nederlands Blazers Ensemble. And they also played really, really magnificent, I think.
Yeah.
And my ideal would be also to have a bagpipe version once. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, why not?
Well, that would resonate. That would cut through the windows. They would hear it.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is not only the different instruments makes it that make it extremely different versions, but also the interpretations are very very different.
Yeah. So if we can focus in on that aspect, the musical aspect, this is a very beautiful piece of music. Each interpretation is different. So, in
Yeah,
an advocacy sense, in each performance, there's a slight. I almost hear it's a slightly different message. I can hear each one of those recordings slightly differently because there's a personal element to the message that's being sent. It's the same song. It's with the same overall message. But if I watch you in front of the building in Utrecht, I experience it differently than the different recordings. Is that to you also important within the advocacy of the arts that there's that the artistic element is there?
well, that's exactly what it is about and what makes it work. At least that's what I hope, because if you do the classical campaigning as Amnesty does by signing a petition, you just sign or you click and say, well, that's it, and that will teach them.
Yep.
But that's all exactly the same message, and that works because of numbers. If you have, well, in the Netherlands, we had and still have a tradition of being quite good in having numbers of people signing petitions. So that makes impression. I had that when I talked to several ambassadors from whatever country, and they said, here are 80,000 or 100,000 signatures of concerned citizens that want you to act different. Well, then you have an entry, then you come in. So that's important. But at the same time, if you use it for government officials, but if you also use it for the public, then it works extremely well, I think, and I hope that people just give it their own personal interpretation to that
Hmm.
by using their own instrument, but also, yeah, playing it slightly different, a bit faster, a bit slower, a bit softer, a bit louder, a bit more rubato, and that this personal interpretation makes that it is really a personal message. And from a musician's point of view, that's what several people told me when I was talking about that. Said, well, this is this is what we do. This is my profession. This is how we act. This is how I want to contribute. Anthony Heidweiler said, this is how we can contribute to the debate and the mood in society. We have to be relevant. Music is relevant, but by playing this, you can take a stand in a discussion, in a debate, and you can also show people in a different way, not in words, not in arguments, but purely in, well, in music and maybe in emotions, how it is to, well, to imagine for a few bars for 1 minute to be in refugee situations.
Yeah.
And this imagination and this empathy, in fact, that is what we hope that this music will lead to.
So you talk of empathy there. You talk about really connection. You know that the
Yeah,
work of this advocacy is communicating something quite personal to people. In fact, and
yeah,
initiating a personal response in people.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Is that the same as your work with Amnesty?
Now, yeah, partly it is the same, of course, because my work with Amnesty and also in the Refugee Council was always not only on principles of international law, etc. I know those are extremely important, of course, but it was always on the effects of breaches of international law or violations of human rights on individual people or groups of people.
Hmm.
So when you have just when you say, well, this or this Article 19 in the Universal Declaration is important, well, yeah, well, you can say yes and indeed or whatever. But if you say people that expressed in a peaceful way their opinion in Belarus or in Hungary now or in Azerbaijan or wherever, and this is what happened to people that simply did what we think is very normal to do. So if you have that personal connection and this effect on the real lives of really existing people, then you make it more personal, I think, and that is what you need to do. But what we have added now is that we also have persons that bring the message, make it more personal. they adapt this message to their own skills and to their own interpretation. And that makes it, if you look at several of the videos, some of the small clips, and you see people performing, then you can almost see how you can hear, of course, but you can also see in their attitude, in their eyes, how they feel when playing that. And that is an extra dimension that is beyond and the classical campaigning of Amnesty and others.
Yeah. I'm really interested in what makes successful advocacy, because when I look at your achievements with Amnesty and I see big achievements, it really shifted opinion, things which really changed, tangibly changed. Release of a prisoner from Iran, for example. These were really concrete achievements of advocacy.
Yeah, well, in 2018, I think that's the last figure I have in mind now. There were 600 people released where we campaigned for. You cannot say that that's only because we did that and that then government said, now it's Amnesty campaigning, so let's release them. But that is a very concrete impact that at least we contributed to. There are also laws like the International Criminal Court in The Hague. When Amnesty started campaigning for that, I was not even inside with Amnesty at that time, but when Amnesty started campaigning for that, people said, well, you're crazy, you'll never make it, you're naive, you're a bunch of world, you try to improve, but this is crazy and it will never work. In 1998, the Statute of Rome was adopted. So it was a treaty, and 10 years ago, the International Criminal Court was established in The Hague, and it has a role and a function now. The death penalty, for instance, when Amnesty started campaigning against the death penalty, and you have to be aware that then in very many countries like the USA, Amnesty members were in favor of the death penalty. So it was even within Amnesty not something that was very clear from the beginning. But when Amnesty started to campaign against that, there were, I think, 16 countries that didn't execute the death penalty. Now it's 131, I think. So very resilient and keep on asking attention for some things that you want to be done, being creative and not giving up, because, well, that's things are often not very easy. I've never experienced that I talked to an official and said, well, this is you can't do this because that's not in accordance with international law.
Right.
That is it, but I didn't realize, and we'll change it from tomorrow. The first thing is they defend themselves and they react, well, your facts are not good, and you exaggerate, or you are not realistic enough, or what should we do then, or that kind of stuff. But keep coming back to that topic and finding new ways of addressing that by a combination of petitions and smart lobbying and sometimes expert meetings or whatever. And also sometimes by some incidents and going into those, well, that at the end you can make a difference. And that is interesting in this Alarm Europe. We will not, Alarm Europe is way too small just to change the discourse on refugees and migrants, but we can contribute a little bit, and we add a new dimension of having very small groups, even individuals, that can speak out in their own way. And that is an interesting concept in campaigning.
Yeah, and there's lots of layers there, right? There's the factual argument. This is the law. You're against this. What you're doing is wrong according to these regulations.
Yeah, but I must say that if you petition purely on basis on international law, you're not long in business. Because, well, they say, well, this problem is so big now, the crisis is so big. Well, the international law refugee convention is from 1951, so it's so old. Well, the situation is now so different. So we have to have, that's the key word, we have to have unorthodox measures.
Right.
So we can breach the law. So, but of course, for experts, it is still very important, and it's very important to keep on doing. But you also need different narratives, different stories, different examples, and saying, well, not only, well, you don't stick to the law, but also this happens to people like you and me. Imagine that both of us were now in the new Moria camp in Lesbos. I've been there a few times, not in the new camp, in the old camp. But in the new camp, it's extremely cold, it's extremely wet. You have electricity for 2 hours a day. There's no showers, no toilets, no running water, no decent food. You don't know how long you have to stay there. So if we were neighbors, you would be so unhappy and so not knowing what to do that probably in a few days there would be a chance that we would go into a fight, or that you get annoyed by things. And imagine that you had to live there for over a year.
Yeah.
Imagine what you did. And that's what I said to some of the officials. Imagine, what did you do a year ago? What did you do 2 years ago? Imagine that you had to spend all this time in such a horrible camp in this situation. What would you do then afterwards? And this continuous humiliation, what does that do to people? And being humiliated, I think that is a thing that many people here do not want to know, or maybe also some do not know, but the effect of being continuously feeling humiliated because of those circumstances that we created deliberately and that we deliberately don't improve, that is such an important fact. And what does humiliation with individuals? I was in 1916, 2016, sorry, I'm not that old. In 2016, I was near the Macedonian border, the Greece-Macedonian border in Idomeni in March, uh, uh, on the 8th of March, on an International Women's Day. And I was in Idomeni. There was a spontaneous refugee camp. People wanted to go to Macedonia and then to the European Union. The fences were just closed, the borders were closed, and there was nothing done there. And at some point, I got a bit very depressed on what I saw in the camp, and I didn't know what to do. So I figured for myself, I'll walk to the village, 1 kilometer walk, in order to have a bit of a different view and atmosphere, and then come back more fresh and again resume what I was doing. I saw three boys of around 15, 16 sitting on a fence. They were eating an apple, and they said to me, "Hey, mister." So I thought, well, they speak some English, so I asked them, "Hey, guys," and we talked for a while. And then I said, "Well, what's your names?" And one said, "Well, he is Trouble." And the second said, "He is Problem." And the third said, "And he is Crazy." I said, "Well, that's a nice trio, Trouble, Problem, and Crazy." But they came from Aleppo. They had been traveling for 1.5 years already through Turkey and then in Greece. They didn't attend school for all that time, and there was no possibility of going to the European Union or to crossing the border. And they were around the age of my son then, and now still, I think. But I've often wondered what happened to them if you have no education. If you can see, they also told me our parents well, are in the camp in a tent, but we are getting crazy of all the stuff there, and parents, there's a bad mood, so we try to escape. So I said to them, well, I had the same, and I've only been here a few hours, so I can imagine. So we had this little conversation. But what will happen to those boys that see that their parents are in fact losers? They cannot raise their children as they would like to do. So in terms of respect for their parents, in terms of being educated in norms and values, but also in terms of formal education in school, nothing. So what will happen to them in 5 or in 10 years? And how can you ever expect those guys to be loyal to what we say so proudly European values? What is that for them? Is that just to leave them alone and to say, whatever you do, don't come here? And this feeling of being humiliated, I think that is something very important that people don't realize enough.
No.
And I hope also that when we can, with Alarm Europe and other initiatives, that if people have a bit more empathy for what's happening in those camps and with individual persons, that they're thinking a bit different on possible solutions, and not only thinking, well, let's keep them out.
Yeah. I'm going to slightly quote you back to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's an interview I was reading where you talk about, it's an interview actually of yours with Amnesty, where you say that
Mm-hmm.
the other voices were better heard than the voice of Amnesty at that point. And you quote people saying things like testosterone bombs, and is really the voice which represents people as a threat is better heard than the voice which sparked the empathy. And I think is that particularly true on this issue? Is migration particularly true in that respect?
If it's on migration, it's not on things like freedom and freedom of speech or equality. only, it's also on having new people aboard, or in your village, in your town, in your neighborhood, etc. And this testosterone bombs, that was after the New Year's Eve in Cologne. There was then the New Year's Eve, and that very many women afterwards said, well, we are being severely harassed by North African youngsters, etc. So now people act like everyone is not only a possible, but is a threat, as a clear and present danger if you have too many Muslims or young North Africans, and also criminality and other stuff. And I think maybe I have been maybe too polite, maybe not creative enough, and maybe just too simply angry on use of that kind of terms, like the Minister of Foreign Affairs said that in the Syria war in 2015, I think it was, that people from Syria came for breast enlargement and eyelid correction. Yeah, well, I rest my. And then later he said, "Oh yeah, I shouldn't have said that because it's also on wounds because of the war, which is so for plastic surgery he had heard." But that keeps resonating in society, that kind of words.
Yeah.
And if we then say, well, a refugee is a person with individual rights, then a journalist said, well, that's quite boring, Mr. Nazarski. Wouldn't you have a bit? So you need to have a different narrative, different discourse. Otherwise, you're not in business.
Yeah.
And that is what now after the elections in the Netherlands will become very clear, or has become very clear, at least to me, and that not only for political parties but also for NGOs. Well, I think it will be good if they reconsider, well, the way they collaborate, but also the way they communicate to society.
So creative strategies to be better heard.
Yeah, but then not with a bunch of creative directors of commercial advertisement companies, but more in. Yeah, I don't know how, because if I knew how, I already a long time would have done it, of course.
Yeah.
But I know now that what I did until now, was in some respects was a bit effective, but in too many others not. And one of the things in working for human rights is that, well, you want then human rights for everyone and everywhere, that you're always very busy and that you're never satisfied. But that's part of the work, I think. And well, justice and equality are so far away for so many people. Well, that yeah, you can't say, well, not now, or
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time you must be realistic, and some change and mood in society is very difficult. And the mood has been fed for years and years, over years and years.
Indeed. So if we're talking to artists on this podcast and faced with that, which can feel very overwhelming, that kind of political sentiment, and a political sentiment that seems to play well in elections, for artists to feel they have a voice in that, I think is very difficult. I guess my question is, do you have any thoughts or advice or a way of thinking? Because one of the words that was really stood out when you're talking about Amnesty's work is being resilient and keeping going and finding different ways to make your argument and not stopping in order to get where you get. You don't get where you get quickly. You don't get it through a few conversations. You don't get it with one argument. You're making multiple arguments, influencing public opinion, influencing political opinion, passing regulations, which then you can cite at a later date to achieve the change that needs to be made.
Exactly. If it was very easy, amnesty wouldn't be necessary. Well, you need resilience, you need an organization, you need a network. If you do it alone, you will be very often disappointed and depressed. So you need others in order to talk on strategy, on tactics, on things like, we have an alternative. Can we do anything else? If this is impossible, can we try this? What about this? What about this? So you need to work with others on this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very important. And for musicians, I think, these musicians I talked to, many of them said, I'm really touched by what I know is happening over there. And I'm happy I can use my profession or my musical skills in order to contribute a bit, to add a voice to the choir of people that say, we need a different approach, and we use our professional skills also to try to reach out to people that are maybe don't have the same opinion, but maybe music makes them feel and also think different, approach something different than words, than a manifesto or whatever. And if you have music, it touches people in a different way. Mm-hmm. And if you're a musician and certainly if it's your profession, it is very rewarding, I think, to be able to contribute in this way and to use your skills that you have acquired after so many years of practicing and mm-hmm. training, and to use those skills in order to contribute, just a tiny little voice, but to a bigger choir of people that feel the same, and to join that, and I think what I saw in musicians, and I asked a few, could you contribute, and they all said, we're happy to do so. They all say, that's interesting, and I'm looking in a way to do that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a way that music can contribute, and there's another way I was thinking, but that's not Alarm Europe, but that's more maybe Musicians Without Borders. What you see now, receiving communities or maybe non-receiving communities are more and more afraid or hostile against newcomers, and that's especially when they haven't met newcomers, because when they have met, there's a thing here in asylum reception centers. Before a center comes, there's a lot of protest and upheaval, and if it then after 8 years or so again leaves, disappears, people are protesting because it leaves. So that's there was even here in Utrecht, there was a guy, I think 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 now, who said, when they do this reception center in my neighborhood, I will set it to fire. He said it on television, and it was broadcasted very many times to show how afraid and how angry people were. Then he had met a young Syrian woman, and he said, happily also on television, if this woman will be rejected in asylum, she can come and stay with me, because I want to assist her, I want to help her, and she must not be sent back. So that change of attitude is when you meet people. So what music also could do, and war divides and migration divides, you could say, but music connects. If you would have that, migration can divide people, but if music can connect people, why not try to have in asylum centra, in neighborhoods where many people go, and now Corona makes it difficult, but why not have workshops for people that live in the neighborhood and people that live in centers. Why not try to have combined performances a bit more? Because if it's in language and in debate and in discourse, it's very quick gets toxic.
Yep.
And if you play music together and you ask some youngsters, well, if you would do that, well, what you have done probably in Rwanda, uh, could you do that in the same way, or in Palestine or in Mitrovica? Could you do that in the same way in neighborhoods where things are almost clashing? That would be an interesting concept, I think, not for Alarm Europe, but it could be for musicians.
Yeah, and if I think one of the calls of Alarm Europe is basically to give people a better reception, to treat people more humanely.
Yeah, more humanely, exactly.
And then my experience with the asylum centres in the UK is that often they're very removed from where people actually live. Not always, and I've seen centres actually in Utrecht. I think there's a good example of a centre which is in the city.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
clearly a very different experience if you can then take people from that centre to perform at Tivoli and to play with different orchestras. The wind ensemble in Utrecht, I think, is involved, and
And you have catching cultures
catching
in Utrecht.
cultures. Yeah,
Yeah,
then you open up that possibility that you're talking about. At
yeah,
least it's there and possible. And maybe
yeah,
people's attitudes shift. But when the general policy is, okay, let's put people in a forest removed from contact with people in the UK or
yeah,
Netherlands, I'm sure in other countries it's the same. That
yeah,
possibility of connection and changing attitudes doesn't exist.
yeah, which is scary. But well, start where it's possible and where indeed centers are
Yeah.
in a city, and just show people that, well, people, well, by playing together, you also show that, well, living together shouldn't be necessarily that difficult as people expect. If you can perform together, why couldn't you then perform together some music? Why couldn't you then live together?
Yeah. A nice question for me would be about the change that you're hoping for with Alarm Europe. I think that would be I don't think we've touched on that, and I think that would be
Well,
important. What would success look like, or what's your kind of hope as a initiative?
well, in my view, Alarm Europe is a small and very good initiative, and a nice one, uh, that we will need to continue for quite some time in order to really have impact. But even the more it is necessary, and the idea that very many people just very simply can connect to it on the first Monday of the month at 12 o'clock and just sing in front of their town hall. I want a different policy for refugees, a more humane policy, and play some music or perform something else, because, well, the music isn't the only thing you could do. But that is an interesting thing, I think, and it's also interesting because it fits in what, in my view, um, well, I've worked in the Refugee Council, I've worked in Amnesty. I know all the bigger NGOs that are working for human rights or refugees or migration or children's rights, etc. But I also see now very many new initiatives, civil initiatives, very small, sometimes a bit bigger, that are just starting something because they have this empathy that we want, and they think, well, I just want to do something now, and, well, if I have first to develop a plan and a business case and budget, that all takes too long, and just start doing that, and we'll see working. When we work, we will find solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, for instance, the Foundation Migrate in the Netherlands, and they Lopen Vuur, Walking Fire. They had. They called for a new form of action. They want wakes in cities and villages, and they had 70 in only 2 weeks. They did this call, and then from the 1st until 17th March, the elections, they had 70 events all over the country, and 4 marches to The Hague. And they can reach out to so many people. And but I talked to them in the beginning and said, well, what are you doing? And did you think of that? Oh, no, we didn't. No, but we can solve that this way, or we can do it like that. And that is then this creativity, but also this drive, and this just don't sit down and talk, but just act,
Mm-hmm.
do something.
Mm-hmm.
That is very inspiring. So I think in the near future, those initiatives, and also, Alarm Europe, of course, and other initiatives, they could bring a new creativity to the more vested interests of organizations. And I hope this will bring some new synergy in order to contribute to a better narrative to reach out to even more people. So that is in maybe a macro or helicopter view. But I would also like, not also, really improvement for refugees will be extremely difficult, and a different attitude across Europe is very, very difficult, because most countries are simply, we want to keep them out as much as possible. But we can come to small changes in refugee policy, but we also need to see how the field of refugee advocacy can have better synergy and better collaborate together.
A final question: how can our listeners support Alarm Europe?
Look at the Facebook page of Alarm Europe, and then in Dutch, Alarm Europa. Well, if you play guitar or saxophone or even bagpipe, just record a small clip and send it to us, and we'll post it on Facebook. You could also post, every musician could also post it for him or herself, and we'll pick it up. If you do the hashtag Alarm Europa, well, that's all. And there's even the music. The sheet is on the website of Alarm Europa. The best way of contributing now is, I think, to have a massive spread of clips of individuals or small groups that record this song and that say, we also stand for more solidarity with refugees.
Beautiful. Eduard, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm so grateful to you being the first guest on this ReSounding podcast.
Thank you very much. For me, I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope it works for listeners. And anyhow, we'll be in touch, I hope.
Thank you. This podcast was produced by Art 27, a network of like-minded initiatives using art and culture to respond to the ongoing crisis of displacement of human beings in Europe and around the world. To find out more and to join our growing network, you can visit our website, art27.art, or follow us on Facebook at art27. This podcast features music by Matteo Gallesi, created in collaboration with Synca. Thank you for listening.